Welcome to Synchronicity Talk Radio for your mind, body, and soul. I'm your host, Marie Benard. Thanks so much for joining me today. And today we are speaking with Brad Warner. He is the author of this is his latest book, Don't Be a Jerk, and other practical advice from Dogen, Japan's greatest Zen master. He's also the author of Hardcore Zen, Sit Down and Shut Up. Sex, Sin, and Zen was the last time he was on the show, and he has been studying Zen Buddhism for many, many years. But as you can see from his picture, if you're watching this on YouTube, he's a young guy. So he's got a youngish guy. So he has an interesting perspective of Zen Buddhism. And if you are listening on CITR 101.9 FM in Vancouver, we are broadcasting from unceded Musqueam territory on the University of British Columbia campus, or you might also be listening online at CITR.ca, cosmicdimensions.com, empowerradio.com, or on the Co-Creator Network. And wherever you're listening from, if you find this interview inspiring or motivating in any way, please share it. Subscribe to my channel, my iTunes feed, wherever you want to stay in touch. Please do so, because we've got new episodes every week. So thanks so much for being with me today, Brad.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
I love the dinosaur. What is this exactly? A dinosaur?
I'm not sure what he is. He looks like an Ultraman monster. Ultraman was the program that the company I used to work for made. And I guess that's what's inspired it. I had the idea for that cover, but I kind of let the artist do what he wanted within the idea that I presented him with. So I'm not sure what that monster is.
Cool. Well, he's a cool looking laser eye with hot lobster hands. It's quite an interesting image. So I guess he'd be like the jerk. You're saying don't be a jerk, don't be like this guy.
Maybe. I kind of envision him because I took the book is taking this 800-year-old Japanese text and kind of ruining it. So I paraphrased it in my own words. And so I thought that a kind of a scene of a monster destroying an ancient Japanese temple, if you open it up so you can see the front and the back at the same time, you can see that he's shooting those laser beams at a Buddhist temple. And so that was the idea, and to make it look like one of those old Japanese woodblock prints was the concept of that. Yeah.
Oh, now I get it. Okay, so I'm trying to show that. Wow. Okay, yeah, I get it now. Cool. So tell us a little bit about, first of all, I want to hear more about the book, but how did you get involved in Zen Buddhism in the first place?
Well, it's I got involved when I was 18 or 19-year-old punk rock bass player for this band called Zero Defects, and I'd gotten into punk rock because I really wanted something that was real and honest and made sense to me. So I eventually got kind of disappointed with the punk scene because it kind of got swamped by, idiots who just wanted to go in and start fights with the slam dancers. So that was about the time I discovered Zen through randomly taking this class at Kent State University, where I was a student at the time. And it just blew me away because I thought, this is the most punk rock thing I've ever seen in my life or ever heard of, because they start off by the Zen ideas. You do question society and question your environment and your elders and all of that stuff, but then you also go and question yourself. So it seemed to me like the kind of ultimate rebellion, because I was rebelling even against me. So I don't know how much further you can take rebellion than that.
Cool. Yeah, that does sound very like I'm not super familiar with the punk movement. I just know like punk music.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do get that there's kind of these groups that form, whether it's punk rock or hip hop or political affiliations, and then they sort of just start to all talk amongst themselves and believe what each other believe without questioning anything outside of their little bubble.
Yeah, that's what happened with the punk scene. The band I was in, Zero Defects, was a very political band. Not that we really sang about specific issues, but the idea was to make a change in the world and to not just do cars and girls type of music. We were actually trying to talk about issues and stuff. So yeah, there was a tendency though to kind of become very, compressed in your own little area, and that was also a bit disappointing.
So let's talk a little. Well, there's so many questions that I have for you, but maybe you could start with sharing a little bit about who this Dogen guy is, because he's from like what, the 12th or 13th century in
13th
Japan?
century, yeah, and the name is Dogen, but everybody mispronounces it because we're used to seeing a G and an E. You learn in school that it's supposed to be pronounced a J, but it's Japanese, so it's Dogen, 2 syllables. And he was a 13th century Japanese Buddhist monk who he lost both his parents early in his life. When he was 7 years old, his mother died and his father had already been dead for a few years then. So he was, I'm not sure exactly who he was raised by, but by age 12, he decided to enter a monastic Buddhist practice. But he was dissatisfied with the Buddhist practice as it existed in Japan. It was quite new to Japan at the time. They'd had Buddhism as a scholarly pursuit for a few hundred years, but it had only been about 100 years that monasteries had started appearing in Japan. So he wanted to go to China and see the what he considered a more real, a more closer to the source form of Buddhism. So he went to China, and there he discovered a teacher named Tendo Nyojo who taught him a very direct method of meditation, which had no object and no goal. And he was very impressed by that. He became a teacher in Tendo Nyojo's lineage, and when he was 27 years old, he came back to Japan and almost immediately started writing. This is one of the unique features of Dogen. It's not absolutely unique, but it's certainly unusual, because most of the time when you're reading a book supposedly by some ancient Zen master, it's not really that master himself or herself writing the words, it's their students. But Dogen actually wrote his own stuff. And he was quite young when he did it, which gives his work a different sort of feeling to the kind of things that you might read by very elderly people who had been around for a long time and worked on it for a long time. But he was also very wise because he started at such an early age. So his work is very interesting, and I was introduced to it quite early on in my own practice, and have always been fascinated by him. And this is my second book about Dogen, so it seems to be a theme.
So the Don't Be a Jerk is based on one of Dogen's pieces of writing. I don't know what one of his essays.
Yeah. Don't Be a Jerk itself is a particular essay. The intelligentsia and the scholars call them fascicles, but I don't even like that word because I don't understand what it means. But anyway, it's basically an essay or a chapter. So he wrote this big work called Shōbōgenzō, which is Treasury of the True Dharma Eye, and it includes it's made up of fairly short pieces. And each piece addresses a different topic on Buddhist practice and Buddhist philosophy. So the one I've titled Don't Be a Jerk is usually given as don't enact wrong or something like that. But I thought a better, more contemporary way of saying that was don't be a jerk, because he's trying to point out the ethical ideas of Buddhism, which is that there is no such thing as evil that exists in the universe just waiting to be done. It's in our own actions. So every action we take has a potential to be either in line with a kind of a universal truth and ethics and morality, or not. And when it's not, we're being a jerk. So if you want evil to stop existing in the world, you just stop being a jerk.
That's interesting, because I just had a conference. I had someone, if you go onto Facebook or any kind of social media right now, there's a lot about American politics happening.
Yeah.
And there's
I apologize.
Yeah. Well, even my Canadian friends were
Yeah.
posting about these things and comparing certain candidates, certain people with other fierce characters from our past, from our
Yeah.
history. And it's just so steeped in fear. And I see it as, okay, I understand that this person seems like a real jerk. And if maybe he gets into power, that might be scary for a lot of people. But the thing is that his power and his appeal is he's appealing to the fears of people out there. So the more fear
Yeah.
you pile on, in my opinion, the more power you're actually handing over to this guy that you don't want to have power.
Well, exactly. I mean, American politics is a whole subject we could get into, but yeah, I think that's a problem because once you start to set those things into motion, you don't know where it's going, and I feel that the candidate, where you might as well say it's Trump that we're talking about, but I feel he's a dangerous person because he's it doesn't even matter what he personally believes. He's letting things out that are problematic, and it's gonna bite everybody in the butt. Not to work blue on your show, but including him. So and that's what always happens to guys like that. And if he knew his history, he'd know that you don't get anywhere this way. You might have a short spectacular run, but it's going to crash, and that's all it can possibly do. So there you go.
But coming from, okay, so since we said the name, I mean, he's a reality TV star. So he's doing exact the same. I mean, he's being inflammatory, he's being entertaining, he's inciting fear and anger. And I mean, these are all the things that let's talk from a Zen Buddhist
Sure.
perspective. Why do we cling so much? Why do we find all this garbage so entertaining?
Well, I think it's something we all have. As human beings, we're wired a certain way. I was just watching a program about it was about why we haven't discovered aliens in outer space. But the one of the things they got into in the program is whether intelligence is a something that might occur naturally, or whether we're just kind of a freak. It's very possible that human beings might be just sort of a freak occurrence and not really part of the normal order of evolution. But they're discovering now that other animals are able to do abstract reasoning, for example. They're finding that birds can do abstract reasoning, and we never would have suspected that, until the past 10 years or so of research. But what this means to me is we're not, we imagine that we ourselves as human beings are miles and miles, or kilometers and kilometers, above the rest of the animal world in terms of intelligence and abilities. I suspect that that's not true. I suspect that we're just a little bit above the highest, other animals we have, like birds or chimpanzees or different things like that, and we easily revert back to our animal nature. So we have these kind of ideas that we have to defend ourselves, and we have to recognize danger and all of this. So it's very easy to kind of manipulate that into something extremely powerful, because it's so bound up in what we are. And our layer of intelligence is hopefully there to prevent us from actually going right into our baser animal nature and just messing everything up. But who knows? I'm pretty optimistic. I think human beings will overcome, but I foresee that there might be some big hurdles to cross before we get to the so-called promised land. And I hope that this isn't one of them. I'm hoping that this election business will resolve itself before it actually gets as bad as it might get.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, because even though we've had, I don't know if this is how much this has to do with your book, but it's just it's so current. But this fear that we've had, I mean, once you tap into the fear and the anger and the us and them,
Mhm.
thing. I mean, it was fairly recent that the Rwandan Holocaust
Yeah.
happened. I mean, people say, "Oh, well, ever since the Jewish Holocaust, like we could never let that happen again." But these things have happened
Yeah.
in smaller pockets in fairly recent times. So I mean, it easily could happen again. And so, as I mean, the whole point of the book, like, don't be a jerk. I noticed that it's easy for, like, so often we'll say, yeah, don't be a jerk. Don't, but really we're not taking care of our own jerkiness. So
Well,
what do you
that's
have
the
to say
thing.
about that?
Yeah, yeah, you have to take care of it on an individual level. My teacher used to say this thing that that's pretty intriguing, was always intriguing to me and remains so. He would say that in order to be balanced, love and hate have to be equal. And I at first found that a kind of a frightening idea and very disturbing, because I had thought that the religious way was to use love to overcome hate. And here was this teacher saying, no, love and hate should be equal. But what he was referring to was a not hate as in, hate crimes, or I hate those people, or this kind of thing, but the natural tendency we have is a kind of tendency to sort of connect with everything and everyone else in the universe, which is very beautiful and soft and lovely. And then there's this harder tendency to separate and to be our own individual self. And that's what he was using that blanket term hate and love to express. And so what we need to do is find that balance where the sort of hate doesn't become an evil thing. It's just sort of the natural way we admit that we do have differences and we do have separations, and we need to be able to coexist within that without denying them. So I think a lot of this political reaction we're seeing is because the world is changing much more rapidly than we as animals are prepared to deal with. We have this tendency to want to, every animal has a tendency to want to kind of figure out who the enemy is. But we have no natural enemies, so we're turning towards other human beings as our enemies. And so it's very easy, especially in the United States, you have the color lines are very easy to see, whereas the Germans had to try to figure out who the Jews were. We know who the blacks are in America, and we know who the whites are, right? And it's easy to see. And this kind of fine tunes it into something that can be very dangerous. But if we step back and say, well, we have these different shades and these different ethnicities and different ideas about things, but we're all ultimately human beings, then we can coexist and find that level at which we exist. But I think it's not easy. We've been very tribal. I grew up. Part of my growing up was in Africa. So from ages 8 or maybe even 7 till age 11, I was living in Nairobi, Kenya. So I was a kid, but I got to see how tribalism works. And you mentioned Rwanda. In America, you have this idea of the black people and the white people. In Africa, it's not like that. They'll divide themselves up into tribes just like we do. And so this goes on all over the world. And it's useful in the early part of human evolution as a way, when you're hunter-gatherer tribes, and you can kind of stay out of each other's way, but we can't do that anymore. So we've got to figure out a way for the tribes to coexist, and I think it's an urgent problem because we have so much potential for destruction right now. And just to bring it back to the book, since I guess that's what we're here talking about, I think Dogen was aware of that even early on in history, and was trying to offer us a way that we can see beyond those sorts of differences into what makes us all human and what makes us all the same.
Hmm. Well, again, we are speaking with Brad Warner. This is Brad Warner, and he is the author of his latest book, Don't Be a Jerk, and Other Practical Advice from Dogen, Japan's greatest Zen master. And now, is that your opinion or is that a fact?
Yeah, me and my editor had a discussion about whether we should say greatest. The title was once longer even than that, so so it is my opinion. I think he was the greatest one, but I understand that there are people who think otherwise. But if you're going to sell a book, you got to say it's the greatest, right?
So are there people in Zen Buddhism that fight against the other? No, he's the greatest. No, he's the greatest.
Oh God, yeah. It's true, but it never, as far as I know, has ever come to blows. I think one of the things that sort of bothered me when I first started studying with my teacher was his insistence that Dogen was the ultimate Zen teacher, because he felt very strongly about that. But I started to realize that he didn't go that extra step and say Dogen is the greatest, therefore everyone who doesn't believe he's the greatest should be killed or silenced. He didn't say that, but it was more like a confidence that he, for himself, had found the one teacher who worked best, and he was going to present that to you honestly. So that's what I'm trying to do. I mean, if I didn't think that Dogen was the best, I would be writing about somebody else who I thought was the best. But on the other hand, I think that's also subjective. He may not be the best for everybody, but it certainly works for me. So there you go.
So, Brad, I'm curious. I have a lot of teachers in various subjects that I agree with. I mean, the ones that I respect the most, I agree with most of what they say, but a lot of them I don't agree with everything. So I'm curious if there's anything that you disagree with Dogen.
Well, it's hard to say because I only know him through his writing, and it was 800 years ago. So it's difficult. But I find him attractive because he's very modern in his thinking. For example, there's an entire chapter which I wrote about in the book where he goes into this idea of men and women being absolutely equal in terms of intelligence and spiritual ability and all of that, which in the time that he was writing that essay was a very revolutionary idea. In Japan, it's still a revolutionary idea. So it's So I really like that about him. As far as things I disagree with, I think he might have been a little bit too uptight about certain things. Although, who's to say? But he was very strict with himself, and he was very strict with the monks who came to study with him, because he only treated them as strictly as he treated himself, which was pretty severe by our standards. But he also, in his mind, that was the so-called middle way between being too severe and being too nice. So you have to take it in the context of the time. So I can't really think of any opinions he held. There's a problematic aspect of Dogen because in his early writings, he's very open and says that everybody is equal in their way of being able to understand the ultimate truth of the universe and so forth. And in later writings, he seems to take the view that only an ordained monk living in a temple can possibly understand the truth. And it's hard to reconcile these things until you realize that he was writing both of those views simultaneously, and that he had a strong tendency towards contradicting himself. Because it depends on how you look at the subject. So if you are a group of monks living in the cold in the mountains of Japan, a long way from anything, there's no convenience stores, there's no supermarkets, there's no Amazon, you're just stuck in the mountains here with the snow and the wilderness outside. It's necessary for the teacher to come along and say, you guys are the best and you're doing the right thing here. But when you're addressing a wider population, you can kind of let some of that down and say, well, everybody can really do this. It's just a different kinds of approaches are necessary for different situations. So, if there's anything I would disagree with him, it's those later chapters that take such a strong view. of monastic practice. But then again, like I say, I don't think he was holding that view in exclusion to the other view that says anybody can do it, which seems absolutely contradictory. But he's like that in his writings.
Thank you. I apologize. I had something pop up on my screen saying my computer was going to restart in 5
Oh
minutes.
God!
If I missed a few things of what you were saying, but I did make a note of you were talking about Dogen's idea of the middle way, and it
Yeah.
sounds almost like one guy's middle way could be one guy's way too strict. And I mean, it's so subjective for everybody.
Yeah, for sure. The middle way isn't an absolute, and every culture and every time has to find what the middle way is for them. Now, when monastic Buddhist practice and Zen practice came to America, uh, the teachers who brought it to America were kind of an interesting group. Shunryu Suzuki, who was kind of the most famous of them all, he was trained in the strict forms of a temple monk in Japan, but he was also kind of rebellious against them because he didn't think they were necessary. So when he came to San Francisco and started the San Francisco Zen Center, his approach was much milder than it had been in Japan, and this fit in well because it was the 70s and it was San Francisco and it was hippie free love and all this stuff. So they weren't going to be able to deal with the strict monastic Japanese forms anyway. So it changes, but I think it's still relevant. It's not that we're doing some kind of half-assed version of the Japanese practice. We're actually doing the full-assed version of our own practice, and I think that's important.
Awesome. So it sounds like you're saying really, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but almost figure out what works for you and
Yeah.
then follow that practice.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. I think Zen ultimately is a kind of individual inquiry that we perform in a group setting. So this is something that I've been practicing it for a lot of years. I'm older than I look. You remarked about how young I am. You'd probably be surprised. But I've been practicing it for a lot of years, and it's taken all that time, decades, to finally get to some understanding of what it is, which I feel that we do this meditation practice, and it's very individual. And one of the strongest aspects of the Zen practice is we try to never impose any sort of dogma or belief system upon it. There are certain shared beliefs you will find that most people who practice Zen hold, but not all of them hold those beliefs. And it's never considered important to enforce this kind of belief system on it. And that's because it's an individual practice. However, if you want to do that effectively within a group, you have to have rules and you have to have a structure. So if you go to a Zen temple, a lot of people are kind of put off initially by how many rules there are about personal conduct and so forth. But those rules are there not because God has ordained that one sort of behavior is good and one is evil. It's just that people have had monasteries and monastic practice for thousands of years and have come to a kind of consensus about what's necessary for that kind of intense practice. And it involves a lot of very strict rules about what you can and cannot do within that setting. However, once you're out of that setting, there's no more dogma except the ultimate one, which is the title of the book, which is "Don't Be a Jerk."
So, I mean, it sounds like they're more social rules. Like we have rules in any kind of group,
Yeah.
whether they're spoken or not,
Mm-hmm.
of how you're going to get along with people and how you're going to effectively make the group work.
Yeah, that's right. And the Zen temple rules seem probably even more arcane and weird than the rules you might have for your local swimming club or something like that. But at the same time, they're there to perform the same function. So there are rules for how you conduct yourself around the swimming pool that are different from the rules that you have in the in the gymnasium or whatever it is. So we're trying to make this organized system. But I myself have never practiced monastically for any extended period of time. I did 6 weeks at Tassajara in Northern California, very late into my practice, and that's the longest monastic practice I've ever done. I had a teacher who rebelled against monastic Buddhist practice as being problematic, and he was Japanese, and in Japan it's more of a problem than it is over here. But he didn't think that was a good sort of practice. So I don't know. I don't know where I was going with that, except that there are different ways of addressing these issues of how to practice.
So maybe, Brad, again, I want to show the cover of your book. It's "Don't Be a Jerk." It seems like common sense, but as Brendan Burchard says, common sense is not always common practice.
That's true.
So, but could you just give us a little taste of what monastic life is like?
Well, from my limited experience, when you do a Zen monastic life, you for one thing, you wake up very early in the morning. Some temples get up as early as 3:30. The earliest I've done is 4:30, because my teacher, again, he thought the rules were too strict. At Tassajara they make it even later, at least in the summer they make it 4:30. But I think they do they do wake up at, no, they make it 5:30, and they wake up at 10 till 4 in the morning in the winter time. But so you're dedicating your entire day to Zen practice. So you wake up, and the first thing you do after you roll out of bed and brush your teeth and do whatever else is necessary, you go and sit zazen. So you're doing an hour-long period of meditation followed by a chanting service. And if you're involved in a practice intensive, you would have certain breaks during the day, but most of your day would be spent in the zendo on a cushion, sitting still. You have certain periods that are kind of semi-recreational. You have work periods because somebody's got to put the food together and clean the place up. And you have study periods and lecture periods, but most of the day you're sitting. When I've done it, I've done these summertime things at Tassajara, and what they do instead of that is work. So you get up, you do your zazen, your meditation practice, you have a chanting service, and then you work for most of the day with the normal breaks. And then at the end of the day, the group comes together and meditates again. And you just keep doing that over and over. So there's different levels of how monastic practice is handled.
And I'm curious, I mean, I understand. I basically, I want to ask you, what do you think the point is in all this? And I know that, like, being mindful and having control over the way you think and the way you behave is valuable. But I mean, like you said, work needs to get done. Someone has to farm the food, and someone has to invent electricity and things like that. So what is the bigger picture purpose of people getting together and having a monastic lifestyle?
Well, monasticism is its own thing. My teacher, and it would say the standard Zen thing, which is there is no point. The point is what you're doing at this moment. But like I said, I had a teacher who didn't believe much in monastic practice. I remember talking to him about whether I should quit my job doing the working for the people that made Godzilla. Made Ultraman, actually, not Godzilla, but that's a whole other story. It's just like Godzilla. Anyway, and he said no, I should keep working for that company, because he was very much a believer that you should integrate the practice into your daily life, and that's what I've done. So my practice is to get up in the morning and meditate first thing in the morning, and then go about my day and do what needs to be done to keep this world running, and then come back and meditate again at the end of the day. So that's what I do with it. The point of monastic practice is supposed to be a kind of a training period. So the Zen idea, and probably more or less the basic Buddhist idea of monasticism isn't exactly like Catholic monasticism. So my understanding of Catholic monasticism is you become a monk and then you stay in your monk place for your entire life, and that if you leave that place, you're no longer a monk. That's not really true in the Zen form. You become a monk and you are a monk for life, but you only spend a small amount of your time in the monastery. So the training might be as short as a month or two, or it might be a few years. But the idea is that you're doing that as training in order to go out into the world and do something, either teach or just do a regular job in a Zen way, or any number of things you could do. It's very open what you're going to do with that training.
Cool. Well, again, we are speaking with Brad Warner. He is the author of this and many other books, Don't Be a Jerk, and Other Practical Advice from Dogen, Japan's greatest, in his opinion, Zen master. And if you want to check out his website, it's hardcorezen.info, and you have a blog and a bunch of stuff going on there, right?
Yeah. There's a blog there that I try to update every couple of days, so there's always new stuff being added to it, and there's links for how to get my books and links for where I'm speaking. I'm always traveling around, giving lectures and leading retreats. I'm doing a retreat this weekend in California, so do it all the time. Cool. Just got finished with doing some in Texas last week.
Neat. Again, that's hardcorezen.info. And if you're watching on YouTube, I will put a link in the description below. So we're talking, I mean, the title of the book is Don't Be a Jerk. And earlier on, we were talking about how easy it is to kind of put that on other people. And really, it sounds like you were kind of saying, be the change that you want to see in the world.
Yeah.
So do you have any helpful tips on how to do that? Because it's so easy for us to just project it onto everybody else and then not, I mean, how does one person being that non-jerk affect other people so that they can hopefully not be jerks?
It's a tricky question to ask, because the Zen philosophy is not to be dogmatic, so it doesn't turn into like a list of here's how not to be a jerk, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's more like cultivating an attitude, and the meditation practice is part of that. So hopefully, if you do a meditation practice, you start to see how your own mind works, and you start to develop a bit of detachment from your own ideas. You stop believing so much in your own thoughts, which is really a radical departure from what you were used to. I remember, it was 10 or more years into my practice when I first sort of started to get that idea, and it was shocking to me that I could have a thought that would be my thought, completely identified with my sense of self, and yet not believe it. I'm not just talking about a passing thought that comes along, like, I want some grape ice cream, and going, no, I don't really want grape ice cream. It's more like your very own core beliefs. You don't really have to believe your own core beliefs. That doesn't mean they go away, but you don't have to accept them. So I think that's how we do it. We work on ourselves. I often liken it to the way in an airplane they tell you to put on your own oxygen mask before helping others. If you've ever been on an airplane, you have to hear that speech every time you go, and that's kind of our attitude. So we work on ourselves as a way to help others. So by first working on ourselves in a meditation practice, we become more able to be useful to others because we're less involved in our own nonsense. So that's the main way to not be a jerk.
Okay. Because one of the things we talked about, how one person's middle path is another person's extreme. And I think one person's way of not being a jerk is another one's jerk. Like I bump up against people, and I do my best to be kind and, good-hearted and at the same time having boundaries. And everybody has different boundaries, and everyone has a different view of, to one person, kindness is insulting, or they'll say you're being patronizing or condescending. And it's like, I'm just trying to be kind. So, so I mean, how do you deal with all these different individual sets of beliefs and values and still not, I mean, I guess you can only just not be what you think is a jerk, but how do you mesh that with every other definition around you?
Well, it's difficult because you're never going to satisfy everybody. So that's a kind of a losing battle. And I think a lot of us, especially people who are involved in things spiritual, will tend to get into this mindset where we think we've got to please everybody and we've got to be nice to everybody. But that's never going to work. So I think the best thing to do is be true to yourself and be flexible. So when you find that you've inadvertently insulted somebody or something like that, you have to be able to be enough uninvolved in your own stuff that you can own it. You can say, okay, I'm sorry I did that bad thing. And that's sometimes the hardest thing for anybody to do. And there are times when you simply just have to walk away. There are instances we all get into where there isn't a resolution to the interpersonal problem, and the only thing you can do is just go, okay, well, we're just gonna have to not talk for a while until things cool down. And I think that's a perfectly acceptable thing. You're never going to solve every problem, and you just have to accept that there's going to be certain friction.
And I think that the non-attachment of, because I know that a lot of people, myself included, I don't want to care what people think, but then I've upset someone, and it doesn't matter what I say, if I apologize or not, if they want to be upset or want to dislike me, I have no control over, and then I find myself obsessing about, I just, so yeah, I guess you just have to practice not being attached to it all.
Yeah, it's this whole non-attachment thing is is always difficult, because what we're talking about in Buddhism, when we're talking about attachment, is attachment to a view. So you have a certain idea about how things should be. I am a good person, and if somebody conflicts with that view, then you want to fight against it, or you want to hide in a hole or something like that. You want to react, but it's all different. So letting go of that feeling that things must be a certain way is a very powerful way of being able to work with others. We have these multicultural societies all over the world today, which makes things doubly difficult. It was a kind of an eye-opener to move to Japan. I lived there for 11 years, and to see Japan has not yet really had to deal with multiculturalism, but it's just now starting to have to come to terms with it. And it's very interesting because they've had this single culture for thousands of years, with just a few sort of outliers here and there. But now all kinds of people are moving to Japan from other countries, and you've got I remember a boss of mine said he grew up with a guy who his parents were African Americans who had settled in Japan. So this kid was born black, and he lived his entire life in Japan. So he was culturally Japanese, but he did not look Japanese. And that doesn't happen very much over there. So they're having to come to terms with it. And these kind of things are always difficult to surmount, but I think we can overcome them if we want to really work at it.
All right. Well, again, Brad Warner. Pardon? No, that was great.
Tangential speech.
No, it was great. So Brad Warner, author of Don't Be a Jerk. You can find him at hardcorezen.info. I just love the Ultraman. Is that what you were calling him?
Yeah, Ultraman is a superhero in Japan, and he's 100 feet tall and beats up sort of Godzilla-type monsters. He's the if you ever saw Power Rangers, the Japanese show that they used to make Power Rangers out of was just an Ultraman ripoff. But Ultraman himself never got very popular outside of Japan.
So is Ultraman a good guy?
Yeah, he's a good guy, and he always battles the bad monsters who are from outer space or created by pollution or all kinds of stuff.
Cool. All right. Well, it's been such a pleasure speaking with you today, Brad. I'm just wondering if there's anything that you want to leave us with, or that you especially want listeners and viewers to ponder.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the title of the book says mainly what the message I want to get across, but I think we find that this is difficult. It's difficult to know. I think we all intrinsically know right from wrong, but that we have to work on it. And this was kind of Dogen's big quest, because one of the main tenets of Buddhist philosophy is we're all perfect just as we are. But as a child, when he first entered the monastery, he could not understand why do we need to practice. And the reason we need to practice is because we get so easily distracted and confused. So I think don't be a jerk also goes along with pursuing your chosen meditative path in finding out how to do that, and uncovering your intrinsic inborn ability to not be a jerk.
Cool. And practice not being a jerk.
Yeah, that's the important thing.
It does take practice, because sometimes you're like, yeah, I was really happy and good and positive today. And then other days it's like, oh my gosh, like I woke up today feeling like a jerk. And the last couple, I think have PMS or something, because I've just been like so easily irritated over everything for the past 3 days. And then I'm judging myself for feeling that way, because my belief is that if I want to be a good person, I should have a thicker skin or whatever. So
yeah, there's all sorts of shouldas, but you live with what actually is, and that works better than kind of dwelling in what you should be, I think.
Very good advice. Thank you. All right. Well, thanks so much, Brad Warner. Don't be a jerk. Common sense, but not always common practice. So take a look at that. Hardcorezen.info, and I imagine you can get this anywhere books are sold.
Yeah, it's pretty widely distributed right now. So what's the big chain in Canada? I always forget the name.
Chapters.
Yeah, Chapters. They always carry my books in those shops, and your local independents, support them too.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks so much, and have a great day. It was wonderful speaking with you.
Thank you.
Okay. And thank you for watching. Please do subscribe to this channel if you're watching on YouTube. If you found it helpful, share this episode in whatever format you're hearing it. I want to send you lots of love. Be well. Namaste.